Hi, and welcome to Right Away, Why Journaling Matters. I'm Angie Lucas. I am a children's author, a passionate journaler, and a professional writer. And I am here to convince you that yes, you are good enough and you are smart enough to pick up that pen and paper or that keyboard and write the stories of your life. Now, I know we all have our hesitations and our insecurities. We might think, my life's not very interesting. I'm not a good writer. I don't know what to say or where to start. I have an aunt who already tells all of our family stories, so nobody needs me. Well, I am here to try to change your mind. So, first of all, let's make my photo a little bit bigger and get going on a personal example. Okay, one of my favorite quotes about writing is how to be a better reporter. See a thing clearly and describe it simply. Yes, this is a quote about journalism, but it applies equally well to journaling. All you have to do is see clearly and describe simply. That's something anyone can do. Okay, this is my grandpa Bob, Robert Francis Hill. Here are just a few things I remember about him. He always wore these jumpsuits. He had them in the hunter orange, light blue, brown, and he also always wore baseball caps. Um, when I was little, he called me doll. Now, I think he probably called all the granddaughters doll, but it still meant something to me. He made wonderful soup. He could tell if it was seasoned right just by leaning over the pot and smelling it. He would sometimes put a spoon on his nose and fluff up the hair on the sides of his head so he looked a little bit like a koala. And once when I was 12, playing out in his front yard, he came outside to tell me that when I had my hair pulled back like that, I reminded him of his mother, Margaret. Do you see a resemblance? These little details help you understand a tiny bit about who my grandfather was, but they also are a part of my story. These are my memories of him. They say something about me, about my relationship with him, about the things I value in other people. And when he passed away 21 years ago in January, followed 5 years later by my grandmother, on what would have been his 100th birthday in 2017, sorry about that. Let's go back. My dad organized a family reunion with his four sisters and all of their children and grandchildren to commemorate how this little family went from this to this to this. Let me move myself again to this. Look at all those cuties. Now you won't see me in the pictures because I had just given birth to my baby boy, which is a gift I waited 12 long years for. And it wasn't until I was preparing this presentation right now that I realized something kind of cool. My grandpa Bob and my son were born almost exactly 100 years apart, 1917 and 2017, just a few weeks apart. This right here is why I love digging into memories. Oops, I forgot to show you. This is my son. This is why I love digging into memories. I love the thinking, the pondering, and the exploring that can lead to really fun realizations. Okay, before the gathering, my dad asked his sisters and all the grandchildren to send memories in about Grandpa Bob, which he compiled and printed for everyone in this little packet. I loved reading all the memories that everyone submitted, 23 different people in all, but I especially loved the memories from my cousin Natalie, who had gathered thoughts from two of her sisters as well. And here are some of the things that they said. I remember Grandpa always took very nice care of things. If he used the weed eater, he'd wipe it off and put it back in the box. His garage was always neat and tidy, and he would get mad if you took something and didn't put it back in the right place. I love how they actually included a detail to describe the claim. They didn't just say he was neat and tidy. They said, and here's a way that he was neat and tidy. I remember he liked to sit in his yellow lounge chair in the shade in the front yard with a Diet Coke and ice. He would sit and watch the traffic go by. When someone would drive by with a really nice truck and camper, he would always say, I wish I had that and they had a feather, and then we would both be tickled. One of my cousins said, I used to laugh at Grandpa when Grandma would be nagging at him. He would either go outside and putter in the garden or move water, or he would go sit in his recliner, turn his hearing aids down, and close his eyes and smile. One year, Grandpa got a bike for his birthday, and he started crying and said he had never had a new bike before. Grandpa and Grandma liked to watch Lawrence Welk and the White Horse Cafe. The White Horse Cafe showed people line dancing to country music. They knew the dancers' names, and once in a while they would get up and dance in the living room. See, that's a detail I didn't know. I loved hearing these details. They were some of my favorites in the whole book. And at the end of the entry, Natalie wrote, "I'm not a very good writer, so I hope this all made sense. I'm sad my memory isn't better." Well, that surprised me because of just how much those memories resonated with me. And one of the reasons they might have been my favorite is that Natalie is my cousin twin. In other words, we were born just 17 hours apart in the same hospital. And so my grandma would get us matching outfits, like you see here when we were infants and when we were toddlers with another cousin. But that's not the only reason. It's also because my cousin grew up just a couple blocks from Grandpa Bob. I lived 200 miles away, and sure, we visited as often as we could, but I didn't have the intimate daily relationship with him that she was able to have being so close. And her memories helped him come alive for me in a whole new way. I also loved how the things that Natalie, Stephanie, and Lindsay wrote down about Grandpa Bob reflected who they are. I love that insight into their family culture, which values humor and close family ties. I love my Aunt April's house. It's always covered with grandchildren, humor, laughter, and I love the chance to read stories that they have passed down and still joke about after all these years. And so while I'm here soaking up all these wonderful memories, my cousin's apologizing that she's not a very good writer. So that kind of raises a question for me. What does it take to be a good journaler? I have some thoughts. Now, I know good writing when I see it. It is literally my job, and it has been for 20 years. I majored in English and journalism in college. I'm a children's author. This is my book. I've been a magazine and a book editor. Here are some of the magazines and the books that I edited. As you can see, they are actually about memory keeping. So I know of what I speak here. Journaling and writing have always been a big part of my life. Here are a few of my journals. And I think with all of this experience that there's really only 3 simple ingredients to being a good journaler. Let's talk about each of them, along with a few common barriers that can get in the way of each one. Okay. The first ingredient in good journaling is vision. Nobody sees the world from your exact vantage point, not even siblings that grew up in the same house. Nobody sees your children, your parents, your grandparents, or your spouse the way that you see them. And the closer you look, the more you realize that there is to see. When I worked for that memory keeping magazine, at first I was intimidated by all of these celebrity scrapbookers, and yes, that was a thing. They lived such interesting lives. But over time, I realized that those who were good at scrapbooking weren't necessarily more interesting as people. They were simply better at noticing what was interesting in their lives and highlighting it. They had vision. Now, vision is the first most essential ingredient in being a good journaler. The greatest thing a human being ever does in this world is to see something. To see clearly is poetry, prophecy, and religion all in one. You know that feeling when someone sees who you really are and knows you well? It's a little bit of magic, I think. And it turns out that the very act of writing things down can change the way that you see your life and can tap into a little bit of that magic. Here are 2 quick ways that you can help hone your vision. The first one is to start writing about somebody else. It can be intimidating, I know this, to start a journaling habit by writing about ourselves. It's hard to turn our vision inward sometimes. But if this makes you hesitate, I invite you to turn your vision on the people that you love. Write about a grandparent, a parent, a sibling, a spouse, a child, a best friend. Even if someone else has told their story, there's still a piece missing, your perspective. You can start by making a list of all the people you'd like to write about. Try to fill 1 page for each person, things you loved about them, memories you experienced together, things you had in common. Or write down old family stories that get told over and over again, but tell them from your perspective. These are great places to start. Another challenge that we have is that if we sit down to journal and ideas don't pop into our mind immediately, we start to panic. And believe me, as a writer, I know the panic of the blank white page. We think, I'm terrible at this. I have no ideas. I have a horrible memory. So my tip here is to let your ideas percolate. when we first get asked a question, it can feel like we're a deer in the headlights because, well, I don't remember that. I don't remember that detail from elementary school. I don't know what my favorite book is. I don't, if it doesn't come immediately to mind, we feel like failures, right? The key is to start with a prompt, any kind of prompt, and allow the question to sit in the back of your mind as you go about your day or your week. Let your subconscious work on it. You can Google journaling prompts or get a book of them. Search Family History 52 Stories to get these lists of, of prompts right here about all different topics. There's a different list for each month. There's 144 questions in all, and you can use them to write one story a week. And then there you go. You have 52 stories about your life. But as you ask yourself a question and let the idea sit as you go about your day, when you're in the shower, when you're driving, when you're on a walk, you never know when the answer to that question might pop into your mind. And even if the exact memory doesn't surface, something else is bound to come up that might be worth writing about. So honing your vision and learning to see what's interesting about your life simply takes a little bit of trust, a few writing prompts, and some ongoing practice. And you can kind of analogize it to peering through a microscope or looking through a telescope. The closer you look, the more you realize that there is to see, but sometimes you need the right tools. The second ingredient is your voice. Journaling is a beautiful practice for helping us figure out what we think and express who we are in our own words, in our own way. It helps us put our feelings and our thoughts into words, which can give us a sense of order and control that I don't think we can find any other way. As Aldous Huxley says, words form the thread on which we string our experiences. We do need language. Just try to imagine life and human connection without it. It's like trying, you remember trying to communicate with a baby who can't speak yet. I mean, words are a bridge from one mind to another, from our past selves to our current selves, from past generations to current generations, from who we are today to who we will be in the future. But you don't have to be a professional writer to use your words to describe your life. Here are 2 quick tips to help you find your voice. Okay, first of all, what you say is far more important than how you say it. Write how you speak. If you have to say it out loud and then write it down immediately, do that. Imagine you're writing to a supportive and loving friend who's just hanging on every word and wants to know everything that you think. For some people, it even helps to give their journal or their diary a name. Anne Frank called her diary Kitty. I usually imagine I'm writing to my future self so that I remember to capture details that I will want to remember and not get lost in the sands of time. It can feel awkward at first, but the more you do it, the easier it will be to find and embrace your own natural voice. My second bit of advice comes in the form of a super simple writing tip. When describing a place, a person, or a memory, pull in all of the 5 senses. What did your grandma's house smell like? If you imagine touring your childhood home, what do you see in each of those rooms? What are the tastes that might take you back to a favorite vacation destination? What did it feel like to sit in the back seat of your parents' car as a child? Did your legs stick to the vinyl seats? Were you crowded with siblings? Were you by yourself? Details like these can open your mind to other memories, stories, and experiences that you can then explore in your journal. As Anton Chekhov says, don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass. This is a beautiful way to capture the idea in writing that it's important to show rather than simply tell. I'm going to show you a quick example of this. Okay, here's an example about my grandmother that involves telling. My grandmother was an avid quilter. She made beautiful quilts. She always had a quilt frame set up in her living room when we'd go visit. Okay, that does the job. It's short and sweet. It tells the facts. Here's an example of showing. I remember crawling on my grandmother's soft burgundy carpet, looking up at the underside of a quilt, which was secured to a wooden frame with flat silver tacks and red metal clamps. Little House on the Prairie or Bonanza would be playing on the television with the smell of ground beef and onions wafting in from the kitchen. The beginnings of a casserole maybe, or hamburger soup. I can recall the smooth taut feel of the fabric above me and the light filtering down, bathing me in an orange or pink or multicolored glow. I loved looking up at my grandmother's hands, a rubber thimble on one finger, as she poked the needle in and out, leaving tight, even stitches. So I just picked I tried to touch on each of the five senses to make that story come alive. And did you feel like you were maybe with me under my grandmother's quilts? Let me show you some of those tight, even stitches. This is a quilt that my grandmother made for me out of this magic fabric that feels both cool and warm at the same time, and I treasure it. She hand stitched every stitch of this quilt. That is how the five senses can help a memory come alive. Now, I do have plenty of other writing tips to help you feel more successful, but it's far too much to include in this presentation. So if you're interested, visit my blog, angielucas.com/blog, and look for 18 simple tips for stress-free journaling, as you see here. Okay, the third ingredient to being a good journaler is value. Believing it's important, having an open and willing heart, and committing to participate. You have to believe that your vision and your voice matter, because they do. Do you realize that even professional writers don't find writing easy? It's actually quite hard to translate thoughts into words and get it to sound the way that it sounded in our heads. People don't write because it's easy, but because they believe it matters. It's the same way no one who runs a marathon does it because it's easy. They do it for the physical fitness benefits, the challenge, the pride and accomplishment of crossing that finish line. The same can be said for journal keeping, and in my case, for running too. I hate writing. I love having written. I hate running. I love having run. Here are just a few tips for finding greater value in the practice of telling your story. Okay, first up, do you realize the vast benefits journaling can have for our mental and even our physical health? Journaling has other benefits, according to positivepsychology.com, including the ability to boost your mood, improve your memory, strengthen the immune system, help you sleep better, calm and clear your mind, enhance self-awareness, promote creativity, release tension, help you work through difficult emotions, among dozens of other benefits. Okay, one way to learn to value your experiences better, this is my first tip here, is to ask yourself better questions. Again, look for journaling prompts, as mentioned earlier. The writer Malcolm Gladwell, who I really admire, he has interviewed countless famous and fascinating people, scientists, inventors, celebrities, musicians, artists, world leaders. And although he's an introvert, he still makes himself talk to whatever random person he finds himself sitting next to on a plane. And he says, based on that experience, everyone is interesting if you ask the right questions. Now, sometimes we may not feel very interesting because the details of our life are familiar to us. So try imagining how someone who lives in an opposite situation would view your life. If you live in a big city, imagine what they would find, what would be interesting about your life to someone from a small town. If you come from a large family, imagine the details that would surprise an only child. If a person from another country or another time in history came to visit your home, what would be interesting or unusual to them about how you live, your job, your hobbies, your family? Your life would be fascinating to someone who lived 100 years ago or someone 100 years from now. Okay. My second tip for helping you value the practice of journaling is to realize what a miracle you are. Experts say that the odds of being born at all are 400 trillion to 1. You are somebody's child, somebody's parent, somebody's aunt or uncle, somebody's friend. And even the odds of being here at all are so remote. So let's put that into context, that 400 trillion, because for me, words that big start to just all sound the same. Okay, so if 1 trillion seconds is, okay, here we go. All right, this is just a comparison of million, trillion, billion. 1 million seconds is 11 days, 13 hours, a little over. 1 billion seconds is more than 31 years. 1 trillion seconds, 31,688 years. And we're talking 400 trillion. The odds of being born at all, 400 trillion to 1. Where did that number even come from? It's a calculation based on the amount of available DNA. But even that is not the whole story. Author and professor David Taylor of Warwick University Business School says that that figure doesn't take into account the chances of your mom meeting your dad, that they stay together long enough to have kids, that one egg happened to meet that one sperm. So he would put the odds of you being born at all even higher, at 1 in 400 quadrillion, which is 400 followed by 15 zeros, which is approximately the volume in cubic meters of the Atlantic Ocean. Hang on though, there's another factor at play here, namely that every single one of your ancestors lived to an age where they could reproduce and did reproduce. So according to Taylor, we now reach a staggering figure. That's 1 in 10 to the power of 2,685,000, which is a 10 with 2,685,000 zeros after it. So the odds that you exist at all are basically unfathomable. The odds of him being born are basically 0. And him, my dad, also 0. And me. The odds of the two of us being born one day apart, even less likely. So what about the odds that 34 years later, we would both have daughters born 2 days apart, after we had both struggled for years with infertility? Mine happened to be adopted, an added miracle. Based on the numbers, all of this is impossible. And yet, here we are. So while we're here, let me ask you, do you see that you are an absolute miracle? I hope by now that you believe a little more in 3 things. That you, yes, you, have a particular vision that no one else has. That you can use your very own voice to articulate that vision. That you and your story have infinite value. And that there's inherent value in the very practice of journaling itself. No matter when or where you were born, no matter the circumstances of your life, I truly hope you will use some of your time on this earth to write down a little bit of what you've seen, who you've loved, what you've learned, and what you believe in your very own voice, because it matters. So what are you waiting for? Right away.